So I'm interested in your thoughts and reflections on the line that says, "Blessed is he who in a well-guarded tablet hath prescribed a fixed measure unto all things."
Mm-hmm.
Where is it?
Paragraph, the opening line on the fourth paragraph of the fourth version revised, and the second part annotated and abridged.
This fixed measure comes up about 4 times, if I recall correctly, in this work.
Yeah, I mean, fixed measure is referred to many times in the writings, but I'm in this context on that fourth paragraph. Did I get the right paragraph? I think I did. I'm looking at
As part of his question, did we answer yet who's speaking to whom and when in these? Because I think for me that comes up for that.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
You'll forgive me, I'm a broken-winged bird whose progress is very slow, but in terms of the who is speaking, just for me, the moment when Baha'u'llah establishes himself is just so powerful for me. The moment when he says me. In that paragraph where he says, "Blessed is he who hath showered upon his servant in the clouds of his decree the darts of affliction, and who beholdeth me." And so I don't know how often me has been used in the Revelations yet to this point, but that sense of when you're writing a story, I'll just use my creative writing workshop moment where you say who is the point of view and who is speaking, and you have about 4 paragraphs to cast your spell and then plant your tent pole of who you are. And so he's kind of the sense of being drawn into a spell. Blessed is he. Here we are, the heavens and the earth, all of us.
Yeah.
Me. And then he says we, speaking for God, and starts to say us a little bit later. And then also me, he needs to enkindle the hearts of all of you bozos. Down there.
We.
First, I just think it's done so beautifully.
Yeah, the first paragraph is right away too, with the "I verily am the path of God unto all who are in the heavens and all who are on earth." The me is very important.
There's an interesting reference if you look at this, "who beholdeth me sufferings with patience and fortitude." If you were to say that the station of the servant, what Baha'u'llah is, also devolved even more specifically on Abdul-Baha. Abdul-Baha perceived his father going through all of these trials and mysteries through Abdul-Baha's life with Baha'u'llah and after Baha'u'llah's ascension. So in this 2 or 3 paragraphs here, "who sendeth down upon this servant, who beholdeth me," and etc. You go from there to would fit and describe Abdul-Baha as the servant in this text. It's interesting. Way to look at it.
Friends, that one can visualize this whole tablet, this whole the discrete introductory part of this thing, as Baha'u'llah's credentials. He's moving through, he's establishing himself. He's saying, okay, this is the voice you're hearing. And now, oh Napoleon, oh Pope, you do this, do that, sell your palaces, do that. Who are you to tell me? Just read this, you've got it. You've got straight who we're talking about here, who's ruling. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think we'll see throughout the Haykal that there are 3 main voices that are speaking in this. One is the divine voice, or God. The other is the maid of heaven, which we'll get to. And the third is Baha'u'llah himself. And I think it's interesting, and maybe there are other voices that I'm not familiar with that I'll come across later, but I think it's interesting, and an interesting exercise to see who's particularly talking in each particular thing, and then see how sometimes whatever we think is our conception of who's being addressed and who's talking and who's being talked to and whatnot, all of a sudden in the mid-sentence, becomes quite muddled and confused. And there's this muddling that goes up, at least in my mind, maybe because my head is muddled, but when I'm reading this, there are some times when you look at this where he says, "Blessed is he who hath caused to rain down upon his servant," referring to his servant, Baha'u'llah, "from the clouds of enmity, and at the hands of the people of denial, the shafts of tribulations and trial, and yet seeth our heart filled with gratitude." So there are times when he speaks as I and me, and sometimes he refers to himself, even when he's talking about Baha'u'llah, as our, a more divine and lofty station. And I think we'll see this interplay of him going between the first person, the second person, third person, singular and plural throughout the whole tablet.
Is that the poetry?
I think it's the point of it. I think the point of, in my opinion, one of the points of the Haykal is that they're all him. They all refer to Baha'u'llah. So he can refer to himself in any one of these particular pronouns, to refer to himself, because he's all of these things. He is I, he's me, he's we, he's our, he's us, he's everything. And he is all of these three things. Mr. Dunbar was talking about how Baha'u'llah said this is a conversation that's going on within his own self. This is his own particular meditation.
Does that include the maid of heaven?
It's correct. Yes. And I think one of the things is that Baha'u'llah refers to in this tablet is this thing being a mirror for our own selves, that we're supposed to mirror this tablet within our own beings. And this is a conversation that we have when we're praying ourselves. We utter these same words. And sometimes we respond to ourselves. Abdul-Baha says that when we meditate, he says it's a conversation between us and our own soul. So we have that interplay going on. The same kind of interplay that's going on that we'll see in this tablet is to a lesser extent, but still a reflection of what is going on within Baha'u'llah's own soul.
And the central pillar of that conversation will be the prayer and meditation. Yes, every time you're doing that.
Yes,
Prayer.
exactly. Yeah. And then we get the response. And you see this oftentimes in Baha'u'llah's tablets and prayers and meditations where, he's able to, and I think one of the literary things that it allows Baha'u'llah to do is express some of our, some of the frustrations or questions that we might have ourselves. But Baha'u'llah is able to express that in his own voice while not condescending his own station, not bringing that down. He's able to voice that in his own voice, and then you'll see Baha'u'llah, the divine voice speaking to Baha'u'llah and answering that particular question. And I think the fire tablet's a very good example of that, where it's a series of complaints and frustrations and difficulties that Baha'u'llah has been through. And and then at the end of it, it switches, and then the voice of God speaks to Baha'u'llah and answers that.
There's one question about the essence of God, which we've read about, and we know that that's not accessible to us. But is it accessible to Baha'u'llah?
No, from my understanding.
No. Now, this if in the dispensation, in the section on Baha'u'llah, Shaykh Effendi addresses that. He quotes from Baha'u'llah a couple of times that 10,000 prophets as great as Moses stand thunderstruck at the interdiction, thou wilt never behold me. And there's a number of places in prayers and meditations where he says how the essence transcends even the manifestation of God. I think you can liken it to, we can never understand the manifestation of God. He transcends us completely. What we understand is the effect of the manifestation of God in our souls. And the manifestation finds himself endowed with this primal will with regard to creation, and proceeds that way. He has impulses which he feels inside himself from the divinity. The main embodiment of that, the thing that sets the measure of all things, is this primal will, and that's the inner reality. That's the world of command. That's the middle line on the ringstone symbol. That's the reality of every manifestation of God. And so then they play out. He has an individual reality, the second reality that appears, and they're different from each other. But you notice, you remember seeing those passages that the manifestation of God, even his individual soul, exists in the realm of eternity before he comes. In the Persian tablet he says he dwells in the Jabarut, the dominion on high. He's there. When he appears here, he's still there. And when he goes back, that's where he is. That's the highest realm of the created realms.
I think the original question, the first question that was asked, has been answered, because right in the sentence it says well-guarded tablets. So, and maybe that's that essence that we can't, about the fixed measure, we can't access that either. So.
I would take the well-guarded tablet as the reality of Baha'u'llah and the inner reality of Baha'u'llah, where everything's stored and guarded. Let us say, for the sake of just thinking about this, we take Baha'u'llah at his word that he says, that creation never had a beginning, will never have an end. That's time-wise. Space-wise, it has no beginning and no end either. It goes forever. It's made of the material realm and the spiritual realms. And the material realms are endless. And now we see galaxies after galaxies with billions of star systems in each galaxy and so on. Let's say every one of those is an expression. I mean, it's incredible for us to think they're all empty. He says there's creatures on every planet. Now the nature of the creatures, well, we don't entirely understand that. Although Abdu'l-Baha says that, even planets that appear to us where there can't be anybody, he says the creatures on that planet are made in accordance with the chemical constitution of that planet. So you say, but there's no oxygen. How can anybody live? But the human form, the human reality is spirit. It's impressed on matter, but the design is all coming from the spiritual realms. That's why we look as human form, I think, in the next world. We don't have to worry about that. We're going to recognize each other. I don't know how that's going to be, but why do we see human forms when we dream of those who've passed on? We see them in human form.
Younger.
Yes, you get to be young again. If your soul's corrupted, you might not look the same. I think maybe that's. I don't know how that works. So if you have this infinite, endless. He says someplace about 50,000 manifestations of God having appeared here. What is it? 50,000 manifestations of God have appeared in this world, in this earth here. So it's all relative to us right now, what's happening with our particular time. And if there's manifestations in all those realms, and the primal will serves all of them, and that reigns in the next world, he says the presence of God in the next world is not God, but the manifestation of God. He transcends everything in the spiritual realm. There's a letter from the Guardian that said you don't attain. Attaining to God means attaining to the manifestation in the next world. Because the essence is, how do you understand that? It's completely, it's absolute, and we're relative. So there's no, it's of the very essence of the grace of God that he's created a system whereby we can attain to his presence through a manifestation. Instead of saying, well, I feel gypped, I want to know him himself, kind of thing. Like I go up and shake hands with him or something. Hey, come on, just get the picture in your mind, The absolute is... Abdullah says anything that you can imagine about God, that's what he isn't. It's sorry, but we need to think, where do we address our prayers? When we say, oh God, what are we thinking of? Something fairly off that way, or is he way east, or what are we thinking of? We have to be very careful. Abdullah says that we don't worship imaginations created in our mind, and that's where we address our prayers. In one tablet he says Baha'u'llah must be the center of your obligatory prayer, center of your attention at all times. Abdullah says. It isn't the physical Baha'u'llah. He says, another place he says, okay, you think of it in a concrete form to begin with, but that begins transcending as you feel the influence of what's radiating from him, then that becomes the center of it, but still focused in Baha'u'llah. He says, otherwise, that imagination you have of God has less reality than the sticks and stones which the people of the past have worshipped, which at least has an objective reality, whereas this mental idea of yours has no reality at all. So, I know we say we don't like to, how can we worship a man? But this is not the point. This is another transcendence, and it's the sign of God. The greatest sign of God is this manifestation that we can turn to Him. Anyway.
Yeah, and that's what we say in our long obligatory prayer as well. I mean, we start out by saying, Thou who art the Lord of all names and the maker of the heavens, I beseech thee by them who are the day springs of thine invisible essence, the most exalted, the all-glorious. The most exalted is the Bab, the all-glorious is Baha'u'llah. So we're beseeching God by what we can understand of God. And even that understanding of God is very limited in our ability to be able to perceive that. And that same relationship of, abstraction between how we can understand Baha'u'llah is that same level of abstraction that Baha'u'llah can understand God, the essence. It's a mirror of that particular relationship as well.
He sees God reflected in his own being. We see Baha'u'llah reflected in our own being, so to speak.
Yeah, there's this, I just want to quote this one passage from Prayers and Meditations that maybe Mr. Dunbar was alluding to when he says, Praise, immeasurably praise be to thee. I swear by thy glory, my inner and outer tongue. So again, that inner and outer being. He says, my inner and outer tongue, openly and secretly, testify that thou hast been exalted above the reach and ken of thy creatures, above the utterance of thy servants, above the testimonies of thy dear ones and thy chosen ones, and the apprehension of thy prophets and messengers.
Says they don't transcend there either, yeah. The next two paragraphs we should read out, I think, and then we discuss. This is, of course, the appearance of the Maiden of Heaven. Talk a little bit about the reality of how Baha'u'llah defines that. Yes, please.
There was a question here, and it's a good question. The distinction between apprehension, comprehension, knowledge, and this was brought up before, and here we have the manifestations beyond the apprehension, their apprehension. Well, how would we distinguish those things in context?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. To think about it, I mean, basically we're seeing them as one thing, but there must be some distinction also. I think for that you'd have to go back to the Arabic or something.
Well, just with no knowledge of Arabic, but comprehend, seems to be meaning like encompassing maybe, and whereas apprehension, maybe you're grabbing the tail of it, you're just, I don't know, that's what I'm always thinking.
Yeah, in Arabic there's two separate terms, and I think that's why Mr. Dunbar is saying it would be good to go back to the Arabic, is, in Arabic they have ilm, which is knowledge. It's one of our months of the year. But there's something that goes beyond that, which is this idea of, Shoghi Effendi translates it as true understanding, which is irfan. And, this is when we say our short obligatory prayer. In Arabic we say, Ashhadu ya ilahi bi'innaka khalaqtani la irfanaka, that we have been created to know thee. And that knowledge is not necessarily a knowledge as far as book knowledge, or it's more a level of true understanding.
Sometimes, or see something and recognize it, yeah?
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than reading about it, or rather than working out, well, I believe in God because that's the only sensible thing to do, or something like that,
And this is where we get in the first paragraph of the Kitab-i-Ghan, it says, no man shall attain the shores of the ocean of true understanding. Is again this idea of irfan, that in order to be able to recognize or understand, one of the biggest barriers to that is ilm, is knowledge itself sometimes. So I think, it'd be useful maybe to go back to the Arabic and see what was used particularly in this when it was translated.
In relation to that, think of that paragraph in the Igan where he says there's two kinds of knowledge. He describes both of those are elm there, but one of them is the borrowed knowledge that these stealthily steal from each other and claim as our own. And the other is that light of God that shines in the heart and endows the heart with knowledge, direct knowledge. We're all trying to get to that. The recognition, the belief in the unity of God, and all is all dependent on trying to get the direct relationship with the Word of God that illumines us, rather than other people's cooked version of it, like you're hearing now. It's,
Do you think that the idea that we can never know, I mean, it's an unknowable essence, so we can't actually know it, is something that keeps many people from striving to actually even bother? In some senses. I mean, we so want to, I mean, we thirst for knowledge, we want to know things, we want to understand things, we want to pick them apart and know it. If you say, you'll never really know God, you'll never really know, I mean, if you can imagine it at all, you have no idea. So, I mean, I think sometimes that seems like it's sort of a block or an obstacle for a lot of people to continue even bothering. Why bother if you can't know?
yeah. I think it's true, and some of us just take it as a contradiction. And he says that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee, and says I can't know him. But he also says that the essence of knowledge is the knowledge of God, and that can in no way be attained except through knowledge of his manifestation. So what is being defined in the writings as knowledge of God means knowledge of the manifestation. And then he himself says that essence is...
Yeah, and in Gleanings, the first passage of Gleanings, Baha'u'llah speaks about this. And, because there is this inherent contradiction, it would seem, that we're supposed to know God, but then he's unknowable essence. And that we're supposed to worship him, but in reality, none of the names that we attribute to God reach him. And the first passage of the Gleanings talks about that. He says, if I call thee by the name, the all-knowing, he says, I am led to confess that they who are the embodiments of knowledge are themselves created by a word from thee. So even the manifestations of God, who are really the all-knowing, from our understanding, they themselves are but a creation of God. So he gives this distance. And then Baha'u'llah, in this opening passage in Gleanings, talks about the distance not only between God and the manifestations, but then he talks about the distance between the manifestations and us, and how in reality that connection has no connection whatsoever. That when we refer to even the manifestations of God as the all-knowing, we're not describing them. It doesn't reach them. And then Baha'u'llah concludes it by saying that ultimately this process of praising God is a grace from God. And that the ultimate goal is knowledge of one's own self. That's something that we can attain to.
And didn't Adele say to know oneself is to know God?
Correct. So. And I think it's kind of, one of the analogies that I think may be useful to this is, this concept of a plant. If you can imagine yourself as a plant, you have limited senses of what's around you. But you know that there's something out there that gives you sustenance. Something is providing you with light, something's providing you with water, something's providing you with nutrients and fertilizer and whatnot to be able to grow. And the plant has no knowledge whatsoever of what that thing is. It doesn't know about the gardener who's doing all these things. But there's a desire within that plant to praise whatever it is that's providing it with this sustenance, that's allowing it to live. And in so doing, the plant turns towards the gardener in any way it can and says, and starts praising it. And it can only praise it by things that it's familiar with itself. So the plant thinks to itself, well, green is a great quality to have. Thou art the evergreen. Thou art the most green. And it starts thinking, well, roots are a very nice thing. So thou whose roots penetrate the most deepest portions of the earth. And then one thinks, flowers are a great thing. Thou whose flowers bloom at all times. So all of these things have no connection whatsoever with what the gardener is. All it is describing its own qualities. But if the gardener senses within that plant a true desire and a pure heart within that plant to actually praise it, then maybe it accepts those prayers. And I think it's a similar kind of relationship that we have with the manifestations of God. That even though we say these prayers, thou art the all-knowing, the all-loving, the all-wise, in reality all we are doing is praising names and attributes that are relative to this world that we live in. We're being like that plant. But if we're able to purify our own heart in this particular process, and God is able to detect that purity of heart, then maybe he'll come down and descend and accept whatever it is that we praise him by.
Someone read the next two paragraphs for us.
While engulfed in tribulations, I heard a most wondrous, a most sweet voice. Calling above my head, turning my face, I beheld a maiden, the embodiment of the remembrance of the name of my Lord, suspended in the air before me. So rejoiced was she in her very soul, that her countenance shone with the ornament of the good pleasure of God, and her cheeks glowed with the brightness of the All-Merciful. Betwixt earth and heaven she was raising a call which captivated the hearts and minds of men. She was imparting to both my inward and outer being tidings which rejoiced my soul and the souls of God's honored servants. Pointing with her finger unto my head, she addressed all who are in heaven and all who are on earth, saying, By God, this is the best beloved of the worlds, and yet ye comprehend not. This is the beauty of God amongst you, and the power of his sovereignty within you. Could ye but understand? This is the mystery of God and his treasure, the cause of God and his glory unto all who are in the kingdom of revelation and of creation, if ye be of them that perceive. This is he whose presence is the ardent desire of the denizens of the realm of eternity, and of them that dwell within the tabernacle of glory, and yet from his beauty do ye turn aside.
We have some words from the Guardian when he's describing this. First of all, he associates this paragraph 1:6, these words of Baha'u'llah, as an experience in the Siyat Hall. And he also has commented that this is the first manifestation of God that's described in any way how he receives revelation, or what the role of the Holy Spirit is with relationship to himself. There are several letters in tradition. Of course, in the Christianity we have this spirit called the Holy Spirit, and in Islam it's called the Faithful Spirit, and in the Baha'i faith it's called the Most Holy Spirit. But from what I can understand from the various messages of the Guardian, this is one reality. It's not that there's one that trumps the other. And he talks about, because there's a quote in here about the Most Great Spirit hath through itself generated the Holy Spirit. But this is, Shoghi Effendi implies that this is not an absolute reality. It's suggestive of the greatness, the greater quality of the religion of God in this state to the previous stages of it. And he also, I think we shouldn't think of the Maid of Heaven as being some independent reality. As he refers to it in this way. He says, the Most Great Spirit appeared to him in the guise of a maiden, descended upon and revealed itself to him, personated by a maiden, the maiden symbolizing the Most Great Spirit. And again, a maiden, the embodiment of the remembrance of the name of my Lord. Again, sang the praises of that maiden that personified the Spirit of God within him. the praise of the maiden personifying the Spirit of God recently descended upon him. So it's as if in Baha'u'llah's spirit this thing takes place, and that reality projects itself in the personation. He even uses this interesting word in God Passes By, not just personifying, but the personation of this most great spirit that announces unto all who are in heaven and on earth. Not announcing it to Baha'u'llah, he knows who he is. It's announcing it to all the rest of us. And in a sense, it's a very modest way to project this, rather than Baha'u'llah saying, I am the best beloved of the worlds, and he says that other places anyway, but at the beginning, he has the maid of heaven saying it. She projects and she tells us who he is, and he's identified in that way. But I think we might be mistaken to want to go to the next world and have an interview with the maid of heaven or something like that. I don't think it's that kind of reality. It's the reality of Baha'u'llah himself.
Nonetheless, it is so significant, I think, and I'd like to see if you agree, that I can't think of any other religious revelation in history that's ever described in these terms that use the divine feminine.
No, it's quite significant. I think that is quite significant. Look at the lineup you have, Zoroastrian with fire as the symbol of the Holy Spirit, or of this most great spirit.
Can you move the microphone closer, please?
Yeah. Going way back to Zoroaster with the sacred fire, and then that's a mineral example or symbol. And then the burning bush, which is a vegetable one, to Moses. And then the animal symbol of the dove to Christ that descends on him. And then in the case of Muhammad, the angel Gabriel, a masculine figure. And in the case of Baha'u'llah, the maid of heaven, a feminine figure. It's quite an interesting
It seems to me, I don't know if anybody's read Terry Culhane's wonderful essay called I Beheld a Maiden. And he equates this whole concept of the divine feminine with the Ma'asher al-Askar itself, with the temple itself, and the feminine nature of the temple. And makes a great deal about the nature of the feminine nature in many ways of this revelation. Fascinating.
Did you say also the B and E, the masculine and the feminine?
Yeah.
So that would be referring.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Gabriel. Fire. She said male. She said male.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
Well, just to get really wild, I mean, forgive me almost, but is it possible that the next manifestation could be a woman, and that she's involved here with Baha'u'llah? You know what I mean?
I hear your question, yeah.
I think, this is kind of going to I don't know if you have anything specific about it, but, there is a passage in Tablets of Baha'u'llah, and, I've heard different interpretations of it, but, think about this. He says, were we to bestow all of the names of God upon one of the leaves, which refer to the female descendants of Baha'u'llah, he says, to none is given the right to object. And I don't know what that refers to, whether that refers to a future manifestation of God, or
waiting for the return of the white buffalo calf woman. I don't know.
This might be a little bit off subject, but Náṣiri'd-Dín in his talk at the ABS in 2011 made a beautiful statement about how when the revelation was given to the Bab, and he gave that revelation to Mullah Hussein, and then it symbolized how this revelation was given to man, and then when the Bab was put to death, Anis was martyred with him, and his body was merged with the Bab's body. And I wonder if there's also a parallel there between the masculine and the feminine, in the same way that we're talking about the Maid of Heaven, if there's some connection in that respect as well.
Interesting question. I don't know the answer. I mean, haven't ever thought about that. Let everyone think of it.
One question, the Bab and his dream is mentioned in the first footnotes of the Noble's narrative. And there was a dream that the Bab reports to have had of the head of the Imam Hussein nestled in the tree, significant symbol, and him drinking from a chalice of the blood that poured from the head of Hussein. So that has a relationship to Hussein, Baha'u'llah, almost as if each symbol, working backwards, refers to the symbolic aspect of the Holy Spirit, to the next manifestation. There seems to be a pattern. Even the dove of Christ, referring to the spirit of peace, Salam, Islam. There's a submission to the will of God. There's a kind of an interesting relationship between each of the aspects of the Holy Spirit as it's revealed, and the manifestation comes immediately after that.
That's an interesting idea too. So, again, Baha'u'llah has set this out. The Maid of Heaven appears in the middle of the document again, and then at the end she reappears in paragraph 100. O Maid of Heaven, step forth from the chambers of paradise and announce unto the people of the world, by the righteousness of God, He who is the best beloved of the worlds, He who hath ever been the desire of every perceiving heart, the object of the adoration of all that are in heaven and on earth, and the cynosure of the former and the latter generations, is now come. She renews the announcement, so to speak. All right, friends, at this pace, we may finish 9 paragraphs or something like that. I don't know. I didn't come with the illusion that we would get through the whole document, but we're hoping to move it forward. But at the same time, if we were just going to read it, you could read it at home. So it's the interchange that I think also is valuable and raises thoughts with you. So maybe we have to take what we do here in the next 2 days, day and a half, as a kind of a sample of how one might approach the study of the rest of the text, and you go on with the study of it yourself. Thank you. Okay. So I think it would be good if we did some more reading of the text here, moved along. Are we all right with that?
Yeah. Just one other quick point. This concept of the Maid of Heaven was not something that was unfamiliar to the Babis. In fact, the Babs sometimes spoke through the voice of the Maid of Heaven as well. And so we have this passage from Selections from the Writings of the Bab. He says, "By the righteousness of the one true God, I am the Maid of Heaven, begotten by the spirit of Baha, abiding within the mansion hewn out of a mass of ruby, tender and vibrant. And in this mighty paradise naught have I ever witnessed, save that which proclaimeth the remembrance of God by extolling the virtues of this Arabian youth." So you see that this, particular metaphor is something that exists within the writings of the Bab himself.
In the Ghaneh, there's also these passages about the Huris. Huri is translated maid in these passages. The same thing. And the promised Huris that you will attain to in the next world are, Baha'u'llah says, the hidden significances of the divine verses. surprise for the Arab martyrs that are going to their death, hoping for 50 virgin meanings of divine verses. They may be a little bit disappointed in.
Yes.
I was just thinking when you just said that, it reminds. Oh, say what?
Face that way.
Face that way.
I'm sorry. I was trying to finish with my line. I was thinking the night that the stars fell from heaven when they had that meteor shower. I think it was 1831, and that was the beginning of the millennial zeal in the eastern part of the United States. And the whole sky was filled with stars, and people got down on their knees thinking it was the end of the world. I don't know. I'm really caught up in my emotion right now. I can't go any further. Yeah, I'll do it some other time.
The signs are, so many signs that were thought of in the past that appeared, and they're all fulfilled. In fact, Baha'u'llah says every reference to in the holy books of the past is fulfilled in this revelation. It doesn't refer to anything beyond this. It all culminates here. The culmination of all the previous dispensations is centered in Baha'u'llah's revelation. And he says, I can describe all of these references to you. There's no time. Sorry, I can sit forward to you. Go ahead. Well, let's have some readings.
O people of the Bayan, if ye aid him not, God will assuredly assist him with the powers of earth and heaven, and sustain him with the hosts of the unseen through his command, be, and it is. The day is approaching when God will have, by an act of his will, raised up a race of men, the nature of which is inscrutable to all save God, the all-powerful, the self-subsisting. He shall purify them from the defilement of idle fancies and corrupt desires, shall lift them up to the heights of holiness, and shall cause them to manifest the signs of his sovereignty and might upon earth. Thus hath it been ordained by God, the all-glorious, the all-loving. O people of the Bayan, would ye deny him whose presence is the very object of your creation, whilst ye rejoice idly upon your couches? Would ye laugh to scorn and contend with him, a single hair of whose head excelleth in the sight of God all that are in the heavens and all that are on the earth? O people of the Bayan, produce then that which ye possess, all that I may know by what proof ye believed aforetime in the manifestations of his cause, and by what reason ye now wax so disdainful.
Skip verse 7.
I mean, you can see he's made this declaration now that people of Bayan should recognize him. That was the whole purpose of Bob's coming and everything that they were focusing on. And this is the first of there's a whole series of affirmations, promises from Baha'u'llah about this new race of men. Ere long will this happen, ere long will that happen. The day is approaching when God will have, by an act of his will, raised up a race of men, the nature of which is inscrutable to all save God. It's a bit of a hint here about he'll purify them from the defilement of idle fancies and corrupt desires. How many prayers do we have that ask us to free me from my idle fancies and corrupt desires? The main veils for our recognition and embracing of the spirit of the faith and of Baha'u'llah are self and evil and corrupt desires. We're made out of those. The animal nature it's just needed in us, you know. Look at the last part of the Ghaneh. He says we have what does he say? We've chained a devil to everybody's leg. It has a devil connected to it, and that's the self, love of self. But this love of self and these corrupt and evil desires that we have are the means whereby we recognize the light and positive nature of divine qualities. We have to overcome them. We recognize them, okay. We're not supposed to just, say, well, that's the way I am. How many of us fail to move forward in the cause because we're unwilling to give up certain things that everybody else says, well, that's perfectly natural. The self is so good at it confirms what the will wants to do. And then the reason becomes the servant of self. Reason says, well, once in a while I got to do this, and everybody else does it. What's the problem? You have a problem? What's the matter with you? You're some kind of fanatic or something. Yeah, you're right. And I enjoy it so much, so why not? And so we move on. With every little shortcoming, we do that. But we have to be judging ourselves. Bring yourselves to account every day. Look and see, what are these things that we're exceeding, where we're exceeding the limits of God. Because if you look carefully enough, you'll be overwhelmed. But we have to try to move in that direction in any case. He says, do that every day so you won't be caught at the end with the full account and the surprise and total surprise.
There's so many places where we're described as, refer to ourselves in the prayers as creatures. There's a long passage in here too.
Yeah.
Does this race of men, is that the new race of men, is that something specific, like future Baha'is that have overcome this?
That seems to be the promise throughout, and he says that you will make them, I will raise up these people with the qualities that God has given to me. You have to instill them. You have that in your temple, and from that you should raise up these. You'll see how that theme repeats itself over and over again. He's building a new race of men, which is not any ethnic race, of course. It's a new kind of being. And exactly if they've started to appear, or this all seems to be future, here. Whereas the great Bobby heroes have already gone on to the next world. So it's interesting to see how that will be. And Shoghi Effendi in Advent of Divine Justice, at the end of Advent of Divine Justice, he pulls together a lot of quotations. And he says, these all, tells the American Baha'i community, these all have a bearing on your day-to-day activities. And in those, there's a whole section about the new race of men.
And it's like 10 pages.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things there, but that particular, the new race of men is mentioned there, and also the hands of the cause, which come up in this document, are mentioned there as having relevance to this time that we're living in now. And of course, we've had the hands of the cause, and we saw the role they played. They've even become the custodians of the faith, holding the whole faith until the House of Justice was formed.
I just bought an Australian prayer book when I was at Greenacre this past summer, and they love that quote that Baha'u'llah said, I'll raise a new race of men from the midmost heart of the ocean. It's in every Australian prayer book.
That's very good, yeah. I hope the Samoans won't take offense about that.
Yeah.
Can we actually move and not do all the sections when you're looking at the outline? Because there's so much to cover, and I hate that to just get a quarter of the way through by Sunday.
You tell me what you'd like. Consensus. I think there's a number of these points that I would have mentioned at the beginning, but then it's too long at the beginning, so we kind of get to them and they get mentioned here.
You had a question?
It might be too far on the side and we could pass it up. With this new race of men, thinking about the how long is the dispensation of Baha'u'llah?
500,000 years.
So I presume it's going to have an apex, a culmination, like all the dispensations have had. And I keep wondering if this new race of man comes into being before the end of that dispensation, then and we have been purified from our defilement of idle fancies and corrupt desires, then we won't be needing those prayers anymore. Or we won't need to be teaching. So I'm just going to let this hang out there, we don't need to stay on it. I've always just wondered back in the 60s, we thought this was going to happen by the year 2000, right? That we would have peace on earth and a new race of men would be raised. But it looks, apparently it's going to take a few thousand years. Is this something that really never ever gets reached? Really never ever gets reached. Maybe we just keep making incremental advances.
You know, this is one of those areas where you read new things about it and you add to your thoughts and you collect them and digest them, and they have them there, and then you read another quote and it throws the whole thing into another dimension. These are things we have to be doing. Bear in mind with what you've talked about. First of all, the cycle is 500,000 years, the Baha'i cycle, but that's a whole series of dispensations. The first dispensation is Baha'u'llah, and he says in the manifestation, next manifestation will come in no less than 1,000 years. So it's already 850 years. But Abdu'l-Baha in tablets and talks says that this is the most great dispensation, you know. Think of it, this has got to be the most important dispensation of the whole 500,000 years. And he says it may be 1,000 years. In a talk in Egypt, he says it may be 5,000 years, it may be 10,000 years, it may be 15,000 years. The Baha'i dispensation, the first dispensation.
Depends on what it takes.
So, you know, well, it depends how we do the 5-year plan and how we get on with what the house wants us to do. But obviously it may take a long time and it may bear a very rich fruit. And it seems like 1,000 years is kind of short for what Baha'u'llah's brought. Do you know, you do the word count. We did the word count of the writings of the Bab, and we came up with something about 5 million words that we have of the revealed words of the Bab. That is more than the combination of all the holy books that we have of the past. If you combine them together, you don't get 5 million words. So he surpassed every previous revelation. Then we moved on to Baha'u'llah, 6 million words. 1 million words more we have in record there than the Bab. It's going to take a time to look at us just scratching around here on the surface trying to understand some things. It's going to move on now. How this new race of men is going to be. Shoghi Effendi says it's a pilgrim note, huh? He said just because you're Baha'i doesn't necessarily mean you will be part of the new race of men. He said the new race of men is characterized by the submission of human will to the divine will. The erasing of the individual human will, then the full divine will operates for that. That characterizes this new race of men. Now you have some prayers where it says, you know, make my will to be thy will, transform me. Pick out those passages and use them and think about them. What are the implications of that for our daily action and teaching the cause and so on? In line with moving forward. Can we have some more readings then? Let's go on for a couple pages and see where we get. How are we doing with the outline? We've got addresses, the bobbies, okay. Admonishes the bobbies. We want to move at least through to number 11 here.
I swear by him who has fashioned me from the light of his own beauty. None have I ever seen that surpasses you in heedlessness or exceeded you in ignorance. You seek to prove your faith in God through such holy tablets as ye possess. Yet when the verses of God were revealed and his lamp was lighted, ye disbelieved in him, whose very pen hath fixed the destinies of all things in the preserved tablet. Ye recited the sacred verses, and yet repudiated him who is their source and revealer. Thus hath God blinded your eyes in requital for your deeds, that ye would ye but understand. Day and night ye transcribe the verses of God, and yet ye remain shut out, as by a veil from him who hath revealed them. in this day, the concourse in a high holdeth you in your evil doings, and shunneth your company, and yet ye perceived it not. They ask of one another, what words do these fools utter? And in what valley are they wont to gaze? Graze, excuse me. Do they deny that therein?
Whereunto?
Yeah, I lost it. Sorry, I've got it on. I'm not doing really well. Yeah, I lost the rest of it. Read it.
Do they deny that whereunto their very souls testify, and shut their eyes to that which they plainly beheld? I swear by God, O people, they that inhabit the cities of the names of God are bewildered at your action, while you roam aimless and unconscious in the parched and barren land.
I don't know. Okay, it's just Baha'u'llah's appraisal of the bobbies at that stage. Now, one of the things he says, blinded your eyes in requital for your deeds. In other words, their deeds have caused them to go blind and not be able to recognize Baha'u'llah. They transcribe the verses of God and yet remain shut out as by a veil from him who hath revealed them. They were busy night and day making copies of the Bab's writings and sending them around to. And Baha'u'llah says in another tablet, they have done this to establish and uphold their own leadership, trying to keep the magnetic axis, being the Babis, was shifting over to Baha'u'llah and his followers. So there was this tension that was going on. And the Bab himself, Baha'u'llah says that in this theme in the Akkas, to read but one of the verses of my revelation is better than to peruse the scriptures of both the former and latter generations. This is with respect to how can you compare even the writings of the Bab with those of Baha'u'llah. From the Kitab-i-Badis, another work of Baha'u'llah, there's this passage. Those souls who have turned away from the wondrous cause are deprived of the garment of names and attributes, and have been gathered up before God in the form of animals, and are accounted by him as such. This paragraph where he says, what words do these fools utter? The original, which was a little too strong in English, is jackasses. So it fits in with that want to graze, but the meaning of the word is, har, it's, donkeys or jackasses. I think, shall we move on?
I just
You want to say something about that?
Yeah. I think, some of the things that this particular thing I'd like to offer is something that kind of applies to the whole tablet. We'll see these particular themes coming up. And, Suriy Effendi makes a statement where he says that our understanding of Baha'u'llah's writings are inadequate without an understanding of the Quran. And Abdul-Baha makes a similar statement about the Bible, that in order to be able to understand and read Baha'u'llah's writings intelligently, Suriy Effendi says, we really have to delve into previous texts. Even though, as was correctly pointed out, the words of Baha'u'llah supersede those of previous dispensations. This particular text is so infused with allusions to the Bible and to the Quran that if we don't understand where they're coming from, we might lose the point. We might not see how great it is. And so there are a number of exercises one can do, to just allow one to be able to appreciate how rewarding an experience this is, to go back to the previous scriptures and really dig these things out. My father was telling me, he said, it's like if we're watching The Office, season 7. If you start out watching The Office at season 7, He didn't use The Office as an example, by the way. But if you start out watching The Office at season 7, you might be all caught up if that was the current season. And you could correctly claim that this is, you're all caught up. You've got the latest season, you're watching it. But if you really appreciate what's going on in a particular TV show at a particular season and you enjoy it, then you realize that you want to go back to the previous ones to truly understand the context in which things are going on in the present season. And you want to see how things have led up to a certain thing. And I think the same is true with the Suriy-i-Haykal, that it's an incredibly rewarding experience to go back to the Old Testament, to the New Testament, to the Quran, and see how incredibly deep are Baha'u'llah's writings. That he's not just using particular terms of phrase as a poet would do, but he's really addressing some very profound theological concerns or issues that people might raise. And just to cite an example with reference to the temple, is that, if we think of the third definition that we're talking about of temple as being a physical structure, that has an incredible place and role in religious history. That the original temple was called a tabernacle, which was a tent, and it housed the documents that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. That Moses brought down the 2 tablets from Mount Sinai. Those were placed inside a receptacle called the Ark of the Covenant. And that Ark of the Covenant had a covering to it, which is called the mercy seat. And that mercy seat became actually known as the throne of God. And that was placed in a building that was called the tabernacle and later became the temple when it was permanently placed inside Jerusalem. And it had different structure to it. It had an outer structure, the outer portion of the tabernacle, and it had an inner portion. The outer portion of the tabernacle was rectangular in shape. The inner portion was a square. And the inner portion is where the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets were housed themselves. And it was considered the most sacred spot. It was called the most holy spot. Or the most holy place is another way that it's described. And in the Bible it said that God himself dwells within this most holy spot and is seated upon the throne of God, which is this Ark of the Covenant. And that there's a covering that goes around this particular inner sanctuary that separates the outside world, the profane, from the holy, from the most holy place. And that covering that prevents people from going in, prevents the outside from coming in, is something called the veil. It's a curtain that's put around the structure that prevents people from being able to see God himself. And that no one is allowed to go into this most holy spot. The only person who's allowed to go into it is the high priest, and that's only once per year on Yom Kippur. And he's only allowed to go through this after undergoing a very elaborate cleansing ceremony where he gets rid of all of the dust of this world so that none of it is allowed to go in there. And that process of cleansing oneself is a ceremonial process called sanctification. So these words of sanctify and tabernacle and most holy place and the throne of God and the veil and all of these things have resonance to individuals who come from these particular faith backgrounds, who when they read it, they'll have a greater understanding of it a lot of times than Baha'is will. I was in a situation where I was reading the first paragraph of the Kitab-i-Ghan, where he says, "No man shall attain the shores of the ocean of true understanding except he be detached from all that is in heaven and on earth." So this idea that you have to detach yourself, cleanse yourself from everything. He says, "Sanctify your souls, O ye peoples of the world, that haply ye may attain that station which God hath destined for you, and enter thus the tabernacle, which, according to the dispensations of providence, hath been raised in the firmament of the Bayan." So there's this concept that in order to enter into this tabernacle, you have to sanctify your souls. That the same physical process that was done in the past, Baha'u'llah has reinterpreted this as being something that we have to all undergo spiritually. And when I was bringing up this point, there's this individual who raised their hand, and he said, I think you're missing the whole point of this passage. And, I said, okay, please, help me out with this one. And he said, the point of it is that he says, sanctify your souls, O ye peoples of the world. He said, formerly this was only allowed for the religious leaders. Now this is something that every single individual is being called upon to do. And this individual who brought up this very profound, valid point was not a Baha'i. He was Jewish. And he had been able to see through these illusions and so forth the greatness that Baha'u'llah's claim was being made. So when we read here that day and night you transcribe the verses of God, so they're writing down the outward portion of what the revelation of Baha'u'llah is, they still remain shut out as by a veil from him. So they're operating on the outer portion of this tabernacle, but they're not allowed to enter into the inner sanctuary. They're doing the outward form of what the religion is about, but they're neglecting the inner part. And I think we'll see this theme come up, when we read these passages, we'll see these particular words come up.
No, I think we've arrived at lunch hour. Go and fortify yourselves, and we'll try to take up some of this points afterwards.